Final Fantasy sucks, dude! This series is garbage! I play a lot of RPGs, and out of all the franchises I've sunk time into, Final Fantasy has to be the worst overall. The slow battle systems, clunky UI, dumb side quests, confusing world building, and this is just me, but I can't stand your basic D&D Bethesda default RPG Maker tileset fantasy settings that half these games have. You say the word tavern, and all I can think of is people shitting into chamber pots and dying of preventable diseases in their 20s. And even if there are things about Final Fantasy games that I like, they usually get overshadowed by some worse feature. The only reason I haven't made a Final Fantasy sucks video yet is because I haven't played the ones people really like. And before I go any further, if you're gonna hop in my comments and tell me to buy an MMO that's gonna cost $13 a month to rot in my Steam library, I'm just gonna block you. That being said, Final Fantasy games certainly have their value, so maybe it's unfair to say they suck outright. The sprite work, the music, the cutscenes, the world building that's sometimes not confusing, the stories that aren't as good as people think they are but are still usually fine. This is the main appeal of Final Fantasy. It is a quality series. But in terms of gameplay, there are so many better options. Good and fun aren't always synonymous when it comes to video games. A game can be artistically or aesthetically pleasing but still suck to play. So in terms of judging Final Fantasy, I'd put most of the games I've played in this quadrant up here. And in case you want to start a fight with me in the comments, here's the rest of my ranking for RPGs I've played. Now looking at this and making note of what I just said, you can see that there's a big outlier here. Not this one. Final Fantasy fucking 12, The Zodiac Age. I'm not going to review a game that came out in 2006. This is the best, worst game I've ever played. It is my favorite mainline Final Fantasy game. Better than 10, better than 7, better than Rocket Slime. Why is that? What makes this game fun? What makes it not good? Do I just have bad taste? The answer is probably yes, but we're gonna throw that conclusion out the window and spend this video talking about why this game is good and bad. Let's get this shit. I was first introduced to Final Fantasy through the 3DS rhythm game when I was a kid. It gave an awesome glimpse into the thing that made Final Fantasy great without having you play the actual games. The music, the character blurbs, the AMVs, it made me want to jump headfirst into the series. But it made 12 seem like an odd duck, because every other game was balls to the wall in terms of what they were showing off. Man with the Machine Gun, Dancing Mad, The Fires of Fate, and the songs they chose for 12 were like... "10 years and 2 playthroughs later, I gotta say, yeah, this game is an odd duck. It barely feels like a Final Fantasy game. It doesn't have the same direction, aesthetics, or composer everyone loves, and it shows. It's weird. I would even say that it sucks. But it's one of only 2 Final Fantasy games I've ever finished, and I don't hate it. So let's get into it. We've got to start somewhere, so let's talk about the story, which is not why I like this game, but I need you to get a sample of what we're working with here. Now, Final Fantasy games are well known for their total bullshit stories that throw a bunch of made-up words at you and expect you to remember what they mean 40 hours later. But 12? I think it has the tamest story of any Final Fantasy game. You don't kill God, you don't kill your dad, you don't become your dad. It's this weird fantasy Amazon Prime political drama. But they do still throw a ton of words at you. Like in between every story beat, they have this big historical exposition that makes me feel like I'm back in AP World History again.
Pretenses of peace left by the wayside. The Arcadian forces resumed their advance toward Rabanastre. Dalmasca's doom had been decided.
Oh, damn it, I should probably be taking notes. Apparently, people like to compare this game to Star Wars, because some of the character archetypes are similar, and it follows the hero's journey and has spaceships, which... Sure, if you've never actually played the game, it's a very surface-level comparison. I like to summarize this game with a quote from the great landlord Hannibal Buress.
You got to keep finding rocks, though.
A couple rocks.
I'll try to make this summary as interesting and painless as possible without confusing you too much. Spoilers, but nobody cares because nobody's ever played this game. This game takes place in Ivalice, a setting that shows up in like 3 or 4 other Final Fantasy games because this was when Square Enix was getting real weird with their world building. The initial setting is Rabanastre, which is basically desert Switzerland during the Cold War. Is Arcadia and some nation you never visit are fighting for no reason. You play as Vaughn, a little white boy who does not matter and has absolutely no bearing on the story. So one day, while committing crimes, Vaughn finds a rock. But then this hot British guy and his bunny girlfriend is like, yes, we'll be taking that rock from you. But then you become friends. Then you also meet the princess who leads the resistance. You free a war criminal, and Vaughn's best friend, a white girl who also does not matter, is also there for some reason. So that's your party. And you have to defeat Arcadie's ruler, Vane, this guy. That's your end goal here. So almost immediately, one of 5 Darth Vader clones comes and steals the rock because... what do the magic rocks do again?
Allow you to wrest the reins of history from their grasp, back into the hands of men.
Sure, that's what they do. They're basically just magic infinity stones that make shit blow up. And Ash needed that rock to prove that she is the real princess and convince this guy to help the war efforts, I think. And the rock is the only way Rabanastre will be powerful enough to fight back. I think. So they go find another rock because you gotta keep finding rocks, but then Darth Vader comes in and steals it again. But then he tries to put his reins of history back in his hands, if you know what I mean, and he explodes in the process. So after 10 hours of completely pointless questing, Ash says, I'm tired of finding these rocks. Let's go and find the sword that can destroy all the rocks, so we don't have to find the rocks anymore. And so they find the sword that can do that. Then you meet Balthier's dad, who has all the rocks, but then he's like,
you gotta keep finding rocks.
And runs away. You follow him to Giruvegan, or was it still Shrine of Miriam? I don't remember. You enter the giant Xanax, and then you meet the butt plug gods who made all the rocks. And the butt plug gods are like,
you gotta keep finding rocks.
And they give you another sword that lets you cut more rocks from the rock that the rocks came from. So you find the rock, and Sid the Science Kid shows up like, I have also brought all the rocks. With the power of Shenron, I will summon the easiest boss in the game. And then a different Darth Vader shows up, but this one's actually important. And he's like,
you are faced with a moral dilemma. Destroy the Empire and be a total...
But that doesn't matter because both of them die in an explosion and all the rocks get destroyed. But then Borat shows up, and Borat is like, oh, fuck my wife, Freddie Mercury has summoned the Bahamut. So now you have to enter the giant tornado. You fight Vane like 5 times, he explodes, and then you finish the game, having spent 90% of it doing nothing of value. Now, that was a very rough summary. There's like a dozen side characters I didn't mention, you keep seeing ghosts from the rocks, this kid is here, the Pope dies, but I don't want this video to be 40 minutes long. There's 2 main takeaways I want you to get from this, and the first is that almost none of the shit I just talked about matters at all. So in theory, this game is this big-ass political epic where you have to rebel against this horrific, oppressive regime, and there are all these antagonists involved, everyone has their own motives, all this shit's going on, but none of that matters. There are like 4 or 5 times you are actually fighting one of the villains directly, and the rest of the game you're just finding the magic stones that may or may not be able to help you fight them. Now, this is all backed up by dialogue that is honestly pretty rich and layered and Shakespearean. And the voice acting is phenomenal too, like whenever Balthier says anything, it's just like... But it's so hard to stay engaged when half the party's dialogue is talking about how they must free themselves from the chains of Arcadia, but then their actions are like, let's go find this magic artifact that we'll probably lose 30 minutes later. There's this huge disconnect between what's going on in the story and what the current goals of the party are. The hunt for Nethicite shouldn't be as important as I make it out to be, but that's all you're doing the whole game. Even if your goals and what's going on are clear-cut most of the time, they manage to make the lore and a lot of this game's backstory confusing, which combined with the rich dialogue means you might miss out on a lot of stuff. They throw all these fantasy terms at you right off the bat, and you're expected to remember them since this game is so lore-heavy. Yagd, Technics, Bougerba. It's even worse if you put the game down for a month and you have to figure out what the fuck is going on when you pick it up again, which is what I did a lot. Here's an example. There are 4 areas of the game, named Nalbina, Nabudis, Nabreus, and Nabradia. So when you're 40 hours in and someone says,
Nabudis was your home?
Nay, but a memory forever burned in my heart.
It becomes a spin the wheel of what in Sam Hill is that supposed to mean? Now the second takeaway is that only 2/3 of the party have any bearing on the story at all, arguably even half. You could take out these 2 and things would stay 90% the same. Vaughn wasn't even supposed to be the main character. It was gonna be Bosch, but then Squeenix was like, people aren't into 40-year-old men. Make up a twink instead. Even Vaughn doesn't know why he's here. In the game, he's literally like,
me? What am I looking for? I guess... Well, you know...
Which is the most solid and engaging character motivation you can possibly have in any piece of media. Beautiful. Actually, he does have character motivation, it's just insanely weak and never really fleshed out past 1 or 2 scenes. But Penelo for real has no reason to be here constantly risking her life for these people. Her only role is to reply whenever Vaughn says anything. Fran is close to being in the shitter category, but she's the one who acts as your little lore guidebook and tells her Bjork riddles whenever Vaughn's like, "Yagd, what's that?" So yeah, shit is weird and Evilise. In terms of world building outside of what goes down in the main story, like the aesthetics of this world that hosts this Gilgameshian Tale of Rocks, I mean, it's better than a lot of these games. Again, personal preference, but I hate heroic fantasy. I hate magic spells and swords and dragons and dwarves and dumb fucking pints of mead that look like this. There's one RPG that does it right, and that's because they turn it into Tokyo within 3 hours. And while 12 has swords and dragons and magics, but with a K this time, it is not like every other carbon copy D&D setting. You do not live in the grand kingdom of default_grass_tileset_1. You're out here in West Texas, baby. We got shirtless people and walking lizards, and I'm pretty sure they've invented toilets in this universe. But it is a little weird how the characters from the desert are all white and blonde. What is this, Genshin Impact? Look at Vaughn's shitty little vest. He's gotta get the worst sunburns. You've got your basic ass mountain zone, 4 different caves/mines that I always get mixed up, 2 forests that I also get mixed up, but you've also got places like Arcades and Balfenheim that make me go, yeah, this isn't a Final Fantasy game with a single digit at the end. This is kinda cool. And it's way better than this. I wouldn't say exploration and world building are the highlights of this game, but it was pretty fun to explore and find interconnected routes or hidden areas. Even if a lot of them had one-hit kill invisible traps that are everywhere in this game, by the way. And I was never bored with Evilise when I wasn't in a cave until the last fifth of the game, which is where they ran out of budget and slapped some of the worst, most obnoxious dungeons back to back with each other. I cannot overstate how bad everything past Arcades is. This whole ass game, I'm running around in happy Fawn Coast, picking fights with all the big turtles, having a good time. Then they're like, okay, here's Acid Forest Hell, where 1 million enemies aggro you at once. Okay, not so bad. Followed immediately by Ancient Temple Hell, where every area looks the exact same and all the enemies give you every status condition, and you have to find all the switches and invisible bridges to continue. Sure, fine, whatever. Then they say, hey, remember the cool feature in the game where you had a map so you could actually see where you're going? Welcome to the Giant Crystal, where you don't get that anymore! And every corridor looks identical. And they all have names like this, and the map actually looks like this! Then, you go to Ancient Temple Hell 2, where you have to solve the buttplug god's evil puzzles, like killing Green Goblin and choosing the right color lamp, and losing your map again, kind of. Then you go to Tornado Hell, where they take your map away for a 3rd time! The only saving grace of this is that this dungeon is like 10 minutes long, but then they decide to hide the final boss's health bar from you for some reason. Like, I don't understand why any of these decisions were made. This entire portion of the game just blows. One part I do really like about Evilise is a lot of the enemy and character designs. Not these guys though, most of these guys dress like shit. This is where the budget went. The Espers? Yo, who the fuck made these? Why weren't they just making the whole game? And I know I called them Darth Vaders, but the judges, ooh. These guys are cool. You know it's good when they looked at Gabranth, who is at best a tertiary villain for most of the story, and said, yeah, this guy looks cool, let's make him take up 95% of the logo. Half the fun I have with this game just comes from staring at the box. And the Ocuria, ooh, these guys are the coolest butt plugs I've ever seen, dude. Redis is this awesome badass guy, and Fran? Hey, I'm just saying, whoever designed the Viera in general should immediately be rewarded with a raise and some positively boisterous dome. And whoever decided that Fran should be the weakest party member should get sent to the hog. But what about the music? Let's be real, the music is the only reason why people like this series so much that they're constantly leaving these dumbass YouTube comments. Which might explain why I never hear people saying nice things about this game, because the music is, I mean, it's good. It's perfectly serviceable JRPG music, but they didn't have the Final Fantasy composer, so it doesn't feel like Final Fantasy music. And that's why 12-year-old me was like, what the hell is Giza Plains? It's one of those things you don't really have a soft spot for unless you had some tragic backstory about how this game was the only thing that kept you going when you dropped out of school or something, which, if that's you, hey man, sorry it had to be this game and not something cool like Monkey Ball. Every other Final Fantasy has bangers back to back, but there are only 2 bangers in 12. Dalmasca Estersand, which is the only area theme I remember, and it's pretty good, and the Esper Battle theme, which is like... Oddly enough, it does sorta sound like Star Wars music if they had to tell John Williams, hey man, we could only afford like one trumpet player, but we gave you an entire extra string section to compensate. Okay, that's enough. Enough about the world of Ivalice. Enough about the story and the music and the design and all that shit that does not matter. Gameplay. Before I get into Final Fantasy XII's gameplay, let me get something out of the way that's gonna stop me from making a billion other videos about games I don't like. I understand that people love JRPGs for their stories, their music, their characters, and that's totally fair. But I am of the humble opinion that how a game plays is almost always going to be more important than how it is aesthetically. This doesn't mean that gameplay always has to be better than aesthetics, but rather it needs to be good enough to act as a base for the rest of the game so I can sit through it for 80 hours. When people look at this half of my rankings and ask me some Mad Libs variation of, why don't you like game? The feature is so good. My response is usually because the gameplay feature prevents me from enjoying it. I do not give a shit how good the graphics are in your favorite game, how open the world is, how nostalgic it is to you, how culturally impactful it is, how hot the lady is. If the gameplay makes me want to fucking die, I'm not going to enjoy playing the game. It is as simple as that. And in most JRPGs, the gameplay usually boils down to make the numbers go up. But there are countless examples of games that do this in a way that's engaging, because the genre wouldn't exist otherwise. So, with that, my video backlog is a lot lighter, and we can finally get back to Final Fantasy. Judging by what I just told you, does 12's gameplay provide a good base for me to enjoy the rest of the—
You gotta be fucking kidding me, dude.
Actually, like, mechanically, the game isn't bad. But it isn't good. It's like some fucked up third thing that hasn't been discovered yet. I'm gonna go over real quick the two main battle mechanics and why they sorta suck, but they actually don't. So that's the license system and the gambit system. So the license system is like your basic skill tree or job system you see in a lot of other games, but a little bit better. Each party member gets 2 license board, which basically means 2 classes. You get license points to earn skills, equip weapons, boost health or attack power, and because it's laid out like this, you don't have to choose your own adventure like this monstrosity. You can kinda just do whatever, and even if you screw up, you can get more license points and unscrew yourself. Unless you're dealing with espers, since each character only gets 2, and they unlock hidden stuff on your board depending on which class you have. And since you can see where everything is on the board, you can make easy decisions on where to go next, choosing what to unlock so you can reach the next thing you really want. But it's not really a beginner-friendly system. The descriptions for the classes suck. They don't outright tell you if a class focuses on specific stats or what role they generally have. You get these little one-sentence blurbs that don't make any sense. Look at this. They don't tell you that the Shikari class gets to attack multiple times consecutively or use ninja swords. They are instead, and I quote, warriors who fight nimbly over hill and dale. What is this, Genshin Impact? What does that even mean? What the fuck is a dale? Thankfully, you get to preview license boards before you commit to one, and you can change them after a certain point. But if you're just starting out this game and the first thing you see upon choosing your first class is this, you're gonna get a little scared. Where it feels shitty is how samey a lot of them feel. You've got your standard mage classes, but everything else feels like variations of this class is good at attacking, but with different weapons. Like Ulhan exists solely so you can equip weapons that can hit flying enemies. While some of these non-mage classes do get a few spells, 90% of the time you're just going to be doing your basic attack over and over because that's what works. And instead of special moves like suplex or whatever, you have technics with a K. The K, of course, stands for come on man, all these skills suck. The only ones I've ever used are Libra and Steel. All the damage dealing ones are outclassed by your basic attack. Of course, this is all in the version I'm reviewing, the Zodiac Age. In the original PS2 version, everyone got the same license board with everything on it, which is why I'm not going to talk about this version at all. This is horrible. But despite these downsides, there's this weird special appeal with the license system. It doesn't come from building the most optimal units or saving up license points or anything like that, but rather unlocking things that make your characters feel way stronger than they actually are. Let me explain it this way. Have you ever played Disgaea? Now this is a pretty fun game. The main appeal of Disgaea is the game making you feel like you've completely broken it. They're constantly introducing new features and services to make your characters overpowered. Item world, innocence, subclass mastering, etc. So you do a few rounds of item world and you start plowing through the game feeling like you're kill fucker 9000 until you reach a certain point and you're like, oh shit, what the hell do I do now? So then you stop and focus on a different way to make your guys overpowered, then blaze through the game until you get stopped again. It's really, really good. It's not that in-depth in 12, but the game does offer you plenty of services and trinkets that make you feel like you've outsmarted it, even if you're just using the basic tools the game gives you. They give you items that double your EXP gain and license point gain pretty early on, and items that double your HP or half your skill costs are also really easy to get. And you have to get a feel for how to move these items between party members depending on the situation. So you do end up feeling like Killfucker 9000 until you get smoked by a boss and have to go back to the drawing board, see how you can better support the unit that now has max HP, or maybe use the double EXP item on a different party member for a while. Even as you start to get everything on the license board and you run out of stuff to buy, you're still looking for ways to make your guys stronger. Where can I find this spell or this ultimate weapon? Am I strong enough to go into the areas that have those things? Overall, it's a lot better than other skill trees I've dealt with. Now, complementing that is the gambit system. This is where things get super fucked up. Final Fantasy XII is an idle game. Not this kind of idle, this kind. It's not like these other travesties where 90% of your gameplay is spent waiting for this little bar to fill up before you press a button. This game presses the button for you. So basically the gambit system gives you these scratch, yandere dev, if-then statements for every character, where you tell them what to do under certain circumstances, and they do it automatically in battle. And this shit can get kinda crazy. You can literally do almost anything you want with this. The game pretty much plays itself. It's a little weird that you have to buy each specific if statement, because there are like a million of them. While this means you can theoretically account for pretty much any situation in battle, so many of these are so situational that I've never touched them. If you can make a funny gambit setup that includes enemy MP is greater than or equal to 30%, let me know in the comments and I'll give you a prize. But there absolutely have been times where I keep getting my ass kicked by a boss and I'm like, this obscure gambit would really help me out. And it does. And even if they can do almost anything, there's no catch-all gambit setup for every fight. For example, there's this one boss in the game called the Trickster, which is an evil asshole bird who, once his health gets low enough, says, I'm going to be immune to all damage except for the specific spell that has like 30% accuracy. So you have to tailor your gambits for this scenario, or even buy new gambits from the shop or get more stuff from the license board. And if that doesn't work, try different gambit combinations until something does. The Trickster is fucked up, bro. You should have been in the Discord call when I finally beat that thing. The gambit system does admittedly break a lot, in the sense that it works too well, and sometimes Balthier will just steal from the same enemy forever because that's what he's programmed to do. But you can alter the priority of gambits or change them anytime in battle, which is cool. And you can even change your equipment and swap party members in battle as long as they aren't being targeted, which makes it really easy to change up strategies without resetting or running away. It's easy to screw stuff up in this game, but it's also really easy to fix things. But since a lot of classes feel samey, a lot of your gambit setups are also going to feel very similar. Like your mages are going to be super gambit heavy and kill their MP with how many things they have to do, and then your Ulhan just has attack and steal. That's the only real complaint I have with this system. And if you don't like to have fun, you can ignore the gambit system entirely and manually do your own moves and items the whole time, but why would you do that? Doing stuff like casting Dispel manually in certain situations, or stopping your usual gambits to revive allies is something I did a lot because they give you that option, which I think is great, but not using the system at all seems like a great way to tank your mental health and make the game a lot more boring. It's a weird, chaotic system that works really well and adds a lot to 12's identity. There are tons of other mechanics that feel like they were thrown in to make it so you don't have to play as much Final Fantasy. You've probably noticed at this point in the video that half of my footage is sped up for some reason, and Vaughn's been running around like a coked up chip player. That's because 12 has an option that makes the entire game go at double or quadruple speed. Like Square Enix said, yeah, we know this game is slow as hell, here's the cut your playtime in half button. This right here is the only reason this game is playable. And it wasn't in the original PS2 version. Look at this. If this was the highlight of your life back in 2006, I feel sorry for you. You also have quickenings, which are just like a bunch of QTEs you can do whenever your super meter builds up that does a bunch of damage to whatever enemies or bosses you're fighting. This is the most brainless thing ever. I've probably spent a sixth of my playtime just watching these same animations over and over, and mashing whatever button comes up next. But if they get the boss down to half health or wipe out all the minor enemies in a gank fight, then I'm all for it, I guess. And even though espers look cool, they function exclusively as a get me the hell out of here, I don't want to deal with all these Marlboros button. Every time I try to use them against a boss or something, I just die immediately. And they use the same bar as quickening, so why would I even bother if I'm not in the hell pit? Also in 12, there are hardly any random encounters and you can just run away instantly from any fight you don't want to be in. No dumbass running in place while you take damage, no getting stopped every 5 seconds, just run away until you hit a loading zone. It's not like Xenoblade or Legends Arceus where enemies will chase you across the whole world. Plus, no victory screen or Adobe transitions in regular battles. You beat some ass and you keep going. 12's battle mechanics are streamlined as hell, and it is very nice. There are some dumb mistakes that hold the game back from being the perfect brainless auto-battling experience, like how when you accept monster bounties, you have to go through a million steps and go to 5 different places instead of just killing the monster, which is a shame because these monster hunts are actually really fun. And it would be nice to see what weapons or equipment everyone could equip but don't yet have the license for when you're looking in a shop or in your inventory, instead of having to go back and forth to see if Bosch can equip a slightly better weapon if he drops a few license points. But other than these hiccups, 12 feels leagues faster than your traditional wait for the bar to fill up game. Although a lot of this game's combat revolves around setting things up to run automatically, you're never disengaged with it. Sometimes shit goes down, or an enemy is immune to the weapon you're using, so you gotta go in and manage that stuff. It takes a ton of time to get used to, and I still don't know if I'd call the battle system perfect, but the focus on mitigating wait times for dumb shit makes the gameplay very enjoyable. I think I can conclusively say that Final Fantasy XII is a good game because it focuses on my favorite part about video games, which is not playing Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy is boring. Boring battles, boring side quests, boring encounters, UI that makes me feel like I'm defragmenting an IBM computer in the 70s before I get killed by a Soviet nuke. Look, I do not play video games to wait for a bar to fill up, or wait for my party members to stop running in place, or wait until I'm at the other end of this empty expanse. I want to kill shit and make things that are cool. And 12 lets you do that. The characters, the music, it's not like Midgar or Spira, but the world of Ivalice is tolerable enough to sit through. And the combat is extremely weird. It takes a while to feel like you're doing it right, but it lets me kill shit very quickly and experiment a lot with the gambit system, so it's a thumbs up from me. Final Fantasy XII is an extraordinarily rare case where almost every element of the game is mid, but it comes together into this big, perfect ball of mediocrity that's fun to play through. It's not the worst RPG Square Enix pumped out in the mid-2000s, it's not the best, it's not the one people like, but it's the best of the worst. So if you ask me, Stell, what Final Fantasy game would you recommend if I've never touched the series before? I'd probably advise you to check the batteries in your carbon monoxide detector because something's wrong here. Why would you ask that? But then I'd say, try out the rhythm game. It's fun. Then if you really pushed me, I'd say, okay, why don't you try Dragon Quest VIII? Look, it's also Square Enix, it was released around the same time, and the tone is, well, fine, fuck it, Final Fantasy XII since you want to be an asshole about it. Just know that there are better options out there. The game doesn't cost $13 a month, and it's better than Xenoblade. That is the nicest thing I can say about it. And it'll probably be better than Scarlet and Violet too. Bye!